Wyoming Territory stretched her dusty arms toward the horizon, cradling the tiny outpost of Sweetwater Junction between parched brown fingers. The train depot stood alone against the vast prairie, more a suggestion of civilization than the real thing. Seen it many times before, these little islands of human hope dropped in the middle of nowhere, barely holding against the wind's endless sermon. Eliza Whitlow sat motionless on the depot's rough-hewn bench, her black mourning dress collecting dust like memories. 5 days she'd been there now, staring at distant mountains that shimmered blue in the August heat. Folks passing through would glance, then look away quick. Death had marked her plain as a brand, and out here, most knew better than to poke at another's wounds. The station master, an old fellow with a face like dried tobacco leaf, approached her again, hat in hand. His boots scuffed a nervous pattern in the planking. "Train's 3 days late, ma'am. Might want to find shelter from this heat. Telegraph says washout on the line near Laramie." She didn't answer, didn't even blink, just kept staring at those far mountains while her hand unconsciously rubbed the small cloth bundle hidden in her skirts, baby clothes, never to be used. Little gowns stitched by lamplight during long winter evenings when hope still lived in her belly. The station master sighed and retreated to his office. Left her to the solitude of her choosing, like you'd leave a wounded animal to either heal or perish on its own terms. Noon passed into afternoon. The air shimmered above the rails, making them dance like snakes. Then from those heat waves, a figure emerged. At first, just a smudge against the horizon, then taking shape as a man walking. Not the bow-legged stride of a cowhand or the measured step of a drummer. This was something different. The careful, balanced tread of one who walked long distances over hard country. As he drew closer, passengers waiting under the depot awning scrambled back. A Lakota warrior, dust-covered and trail-worn, his face painted with 2 red stripes down each cheek. In his arms, he clutched a deer-hide bundle that emitted weak, mewling cries. Men reached for sidearms. Women gathered children behind their skirts. But Eliza didn't move, didn't flinch. Maybe there wasn't enough life left in her to spare, for fear. The warrior approached directly, ignoring the others. He knelt before her, the bundle extended in calloused hands. 3 weeks ago, fever had taken Eliza's infant son after barely a month of life, leaving her a widow twice over. First her husband to Shiloh, then her baby boy to the sickness that swept through the settlement like prairie fire. Folks said losing a husband made you a widow, but there wasn't even a proper word for a mother who'd buried her child. Some things were too common for naming, too terrible for speaking aloud. Her body hadn't yet gotten the news of her loss. Each morning her nightdress would be wet with milk, each drop a mocking reminder of the child who no longer needed it. The pain of it had driven her to this bench, this station, this waiting for any train headed anywhere else. The warrior, she would later learn, was called Chaska Red Elk. He had fled his tribe after his wife died in childbirth, refusing to abandon the cursed, motherless infant, as tradition demanded. Better to die running than live knowing he'd left his own blood to the prairie wolves. "He needs milk," Chaska whispered in broken English, eyes lowered in both shame and determination. His hands trembled slightly, from exhaustion or fear, she couldn't tell. The station master burst from his office, pistol half drawn. "You get away from her, you hear? We don't want your kind." His words died when Eliza opened her bodice without hesitation, the practiced movement of a nursing mother. She took the barely breathing infant, unwrapped him from the sweat-soaked deer hide, and let him latch to her breast. For a moment, the world held its breath. The child suckled weakly, then with growing strength. As milk flowed from her body to his, Eliza's vacant eyes sparked with something long absent purpose. The onlookers gasped, faces twisted in disgust at this taboo crossing of bloodlines that no decent woman would permit. "They will hunt us," Chaska explained quietly, gesturing toward distant buttes, where dust trails hinted at approaching riders. His people would never stop searching for a child of their blood, especially one they believed cursed by circumstances of birth. Eliza looked down at the nursing infant, then back to the warrior's face. Her first decision in weeks that wasn't wrapped in grief's fog. "Jameson," she said, naming him after her grandfather, son of grace. Then, with firmness that surprised even her, then we run. She tucked the baby into her own shawl, the warrior's deer-hide bundle abandoned like a shed skin on the depot boards. They were 3 steps toward the sagebrush when the station master called after them. "You're dead the moment they find you feeding white milk to their blood." But they were already moving toward the shelter of the scrubland, 2 broken souls carrying a third between them. The moon hung low over the sagebrush when they first fled the depot, casting shadows long as broken promises across the Wyoming Territory. Chaska moved like water over the rocky terrain, his moccasined feet finding purchase where Eliza's town boots slipped and faltered. When her ankle turned on a hidden stone, he simply gathered her up, child, and all against his chest, and continued without breaking stride. "I've seen strong men cross mountains with less burden and more complaint. Put me down," she protested, pride still intact despite everything else she'd lost. "Town boots no good here," he replied simply, nodding toward her impractical footwear. "We travel by night, hide by day, 3 suns before we reach safer ground." The first dawn found them huddled in a hollow of twisted mesquite, thorns forming a natural barrier against any who might pass. Jameson nursed contentedly, tiny fist pressed against Eliza's breast, while Chaska stood guard, scanning the horizon with eyes that seemed to catalog every movement of grass, every circling hawk. Eliza wondered how many men had died, never seeing the warrior who watched them so carefully. When the second evening arrived, her feet were blistered raw from hours of stumbling after her unlikely protector. Without comment, Chaska tore strips from his already tattered shirt and knelt before her. "Watch, learn," he instructed, gathering mud from beside a tiny spring. His calloused hands worked the cool earth into the cloth before wrapping her feet with surprising gentleness. "My people know earth heals what man breaks." Each mile carried them further from pursuit but deeper into country where neither truly belonged, too far west for her, too far from tribal lands for him. The child between them slept, oblivious to the growing impossibility of their situation. That night in their makeshift camp, Jameson wailed inconsolably despite Eliza's attempts to soothe him. Her hands trembled from exhaustion as she bounced the infant against her shoulder. "He feels your fear," Chaska observed from across the small fire. He extended his arms. "May I?" She hesitated before passing the bundle. The warrior cradled Jameson against his chest and began a soft, melodic chant that seemed to rise and fall like wind through canyon walls. The child's cries faltered, then ceased altogether as tiny eyelids grew heavy. Eliza watched, mesmerized by the tenderness in those weathered hands. Nothing in her upbringing had prepared her for this contradiction, a savage warrior handling an infant with more natural grace than many fathers she'd known back east. "My wife sang this to him before she died," Chaska explained, the first personal detail he'd shared since their desperate flight began. His eyes remained fixed on the now sleeping child. Her voice was like water over smooth stones. Later, while Chaska hunted for their supper, Eliza gathered small stones from the creek bed. When he returned with a freshly killed rabbit, he found the stones arranged in the same pattern as the markings painted on his cheeks. He paused, staring at this silent acknowledgement of his grief, then reached down to touch the formation briefly before nodding his thanks. No words passed between them, but something shifted nonetheless, recognition that 2 broken vessels might still carry water together. The third night brought colder air and clearer skies. Stars crowded the heavens like curious onlookers as they huddled close for warmth. Jameson slept soundly between them, one tiny fist clutching Eliza's finger. "Why do they hunt us?" she asked finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "Just for the child?" Chaska studied the flames before answering. "Tribal elders believe a child who drinks from outside the bloodline becomes spiritually tainted. No longer Lakota in their eyes." He spoke without bitterness, merely stating facts as plain as the land around them. "And I am dead to them for helping him live." Eliza considered this, her free hand unconsciously rising to her throat where her locket lay hidden. "I was widowed at Shiloh," she offered in return. "Moved west, hoping for a new start. My William never even knew I was carrying his child. The words felt strange in her mouth after weeks of silence. When fever swept through our settlement, nothing I tried saved my boy. 3 weeks old, and already gone. Her voice cracked on the final word. My milk came in the morning after we buried him, she whispered, tears breaking through her stoic facade at last, like some cruel joke. Instead of awkward sympathy or empty platitudes, Chaska simply nodded toward the sleeping infant between them. Then Jameson was meant to find you, he said with quiet certainty. Eliza gazed up at the vast sky, wondering at the strange turns of her life's trail. I've spent weeks wishing this cursed milk would dry up, this final cruelty after losing everything, but what if it wasn't punishment but preparation? Could fate be so deliberate, crossing paths between a grieving white woman and a desperate Lakota warrior? The way Chaska watches over us, I sense he fights not just for the child but for something larger, a defiance against death itself. Am I ready to join that fight when I've barely found reason to continue my own life? Dawn would soon break across the eastern hills. Another day of hiding lay ahead, followed by another night of running. But for now, in this small pocket of stillness, 3 unlikely souls breathed together beneath the indifferent stars. The 5th day dawned with fire in the eastern sky, but the glow of morning brought no comfort to the weary travelers. From their hiding place beneath a shelf of sandstone, Eliza spotted them first 4 warriors on painted ponies, scanning the horizon from the ridge above, their silhouettes sharp as knives against the rising Sunday. "Stone Bear," Chaska whispered, passing Jameson to her arms. His voice carried the weight of certain knowledge. Most feared hunter in the tribe, he tracks prey across ground that won't hold tracks. He follows spirit trails when physical ones vanish. Eliza clutched the infant closer, feeling his tiny heart flutter against her own like a trapped bird. "Will he give up?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Chaska's eyes fixed on the distant canyon walls rising from the prairie like ancient bones. "There is one place they cannot follow with weapons drawn," he said, pointing toward the jagged limestone. "Crow's Hollow, sacred ground where our laws forbid bloodshed." "How far?" "Half-day's journey, if we're lucky." His gaze lingered on her swollen feet, the tattered remains of town boots barely clinging to flesh rubbed raw by days of flight. They pushed forward across the broken terrain, each step measured against the weakening cries of the infant. Eliza's own strength waned with every mile, her body betraying her as thirst scraped her throat raw. Yet she refused Chaska's offers to carry her, saving his strength for what might come. The sun climbed higher, a merciless eye watching their desperate passage. Up on the ridge, Stone Bear raised his hand, halting his warriors with a single gesture. The winter that claimed his 3 children had carved something essential from him, leaving behind a man of terrible purpose. Each cursed child eliminated ensured a stronger tribe. Each rule broken threatened all who depended on ancient ways. He had no hatred for the white woman or even for Chaska, only the cold certainty that traditions existed because they were necessary for survival. By midday, Jameson's weak cries faded to whimpers. Heat radiated from his tiny body as fever took hold. His lips cracked and dry against Eliza's breast. Her own milk slowed to precious drops, her body withholding what little moisture remained. "He burns," she whispered, the first tears in days cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. Chaska knelt beside them in the scant shade of a lone juniper. "The springs lie ahead, but they're dangerous. Mountain lions come at dusk to drink." His eyes met hers, a question unspoken between them. "Go," she said. "We need water." While he was gone, Eliza lay back against stone, still holding the day's heat. Jameson cradled against her chest. She hummed softly, old lullabies half remembered from her own childhood. Strange how they came back now, across the years and miles. The sudden warning of a rattlesnake's tail froze her blood. Not 10 feet away, coiled in striking position, the diamondback watched with ancient eyes. Before she could call out, Chaska appeared at the far edge of their small camp, water skin dripping in his hand. The snake struck with blinding speed not at her, but at Chaska's leg as he lunged aside. He caught its body behind the head with one practiced motion, but not before fangs found flesh. "Shoot it!" she cried, reaching for the rifle. "No," his voice was iron. "The sound would bring them down upon us." With grim efficiency he dispatched the serpent, then drew his knife. Eliza watched in horror as he sliced a shallow cross over the twin punctures, sucking venom and spitting it onto the dust, repeating until his mouth ran red with his own blood. That night brought bitter cold, the desert surrendering its heat to the vast emptiness above. Eliza found herself cradling both infant and wounded warrior, her body positioned between them and the cutting wind. She transferred what warmth she could spare, one arm around Chaska's fevered shoulders, the other holding Jameson against her breast. 3 hearts beating in desperate rhythm, 3 breaths mingling in the frozen air. "We'll reach the hollow by midday tomorrow," Chaska murmured, fighting the venom's pull toward unconsciousness. "If we live that long." "Well, we'll live," Eliza replied with a certainty she didn't feel. Morning light brought an unexpected gift. Jameson's fever broke just before dawn, his cries stronger than they had been in days. When his tiny hand closed around Chaska's finger with surprising strength, both adults found themselves laughing a sound so foreign it startled them both. For one brief moment, genuine relief washed over them like cool water, the first joy either had felt in months. By noon, the entrance to Crow's Hollow rose before them, twin pillars of stone marking passage into the sacred space beyond. Ancient handprints in red ochre decorated the walls, generations of palm marks stretching back beyond memory. "Even here, we're not truly safe," Chaska admitted as they stepped into the canyon's embrace. "Sacred ground won't protect forever. They will wait until we leave, then kill us all." Eliza stopped beneath a weathered pictograph showing women with infants at their breasts. Without hesitation, she removed her wedding ring, the last connection to her previous life, and pressed it into Chaska's palm. "Then I make new promise," she said, her voice steady. "Your child is my child. Your fight is my fight." Chaska stared at the small golden circle, then reached for her hairpin. With deliberate movements, he pricked his thumb, then hers, pressing the wounds together as blood mingled. "Beyond tribe," he said, "beyond settler. Something new, something new." The shadows lengthened across the canyon floor, when a figure materialized from the deepening gloom, an ancient woman, white hair braided with crow feathers, face mapped with the deepest wrinkles Eliza had ever seen. White Crow, the medicine woman, had been watching their approach for days, patient as the stones themselves. She offered no greeting, no explanation for her presence in this isolated place. From a pouch at her waist, she produced a green paste that she applied to Chaska's snake-bitten leg. From another, bitter herbs that she pressed into Eliza's hand with a gesture toward her breasts. "For milk," the old woman said, her only words. Before departing, White Crow dipped her finger into a clay pot at her belt, drawing a red mark across Jameson's forehead, not a Lakota symbol, nor anything from white settlers' traditions. Something older, more primal, a protection that belonged to neither world and both. "Valley of Outcasts lies 3 days north," she whispered to Chaska. "Those without tribe find new beginnings there." Then she was gone, fading into the canyon shadows as though she had never been. As the sun touched the western rim, turning the limestone walls to gold, Eliza looked toward the canyon mouth and felt her heart stop. Stone Bear and 3 warriors stood silhouetted against the dying light, spears in hand, waiting. Eliza measured her steps across the hard-packed earth, each footfall deliberate as a heartbeat. Behind her, Chaska cradled Jameson in the shadow of Crow's Hollow, just as they'd agreed in whispered strategy during the night. The 4 Lakota warriors watched her approach, spears glinting in the morning light. Stone Bear stood tallest among them, his face a weathered map of battles won and lost across these contested lands. She'd known fear before when the telegram came about her husband, when fever claimed her son, but this was different. This fear had purpose, like the lightning that splits the oak to feed new growth beneath. 20 paces from the warriors, Eliza halted, close enough for them to see her eyes, far enough that a thrown spear would give her time to dodge. The wind died down sudden-like, as if the very air held its breath to witness what would follow. "If you want what's left of my son, you'll have to kill me first," she declared, fingers working the buttons of her bodice. The garment fell open, revealing milk-swollen breasts that had been her torment and now became her armor. Stonebear's eyes narrowed, hand tightening on his spear shaft. Something passed across his face, recognition of an ancient power that transcended the boundaries of tribe and settlement. Behind her, Jameson's soft nursing sounds carried across the stillness, innocent counterpoint to the threat of bloodshed. "The woman makes herself sacred," Stonebear muttered to his companions in their tongue, though Chaska had taught Eliza enough to understand. "She offers life." The youngest warrior, barely more than a boy with fresh paint streaking, his cheeks snarled, something Eliza couldn't catch. Before Stonebear could respond, the youth lunged forward, knife flashing in the sunlight as he charged toward her. Eliza stood her ground, chin raised. Chaska shouted behind her, his footsteps pounding the earth as he raced to intercept. But another warrior blocked his path with leveled spear, forcing him back toward the canyon mouth. The boy warrior closed half the distance when Stonebear moved with surprising speed for his age. His staff swung in a whistling arc, connecting with the youth's legs and sending him sprawling face first into the dust. "Fool!" Stonebear thundered, standing over the fallen warrior. "This woman offers life when we bring death." He drove his spear into the ground before him, point first, the universal sign that he lowered his weapon first. I expected to die in this moment, and found myself strangely at peace with that end, but now I realize I'm not fighting to die with purpose, but for chance to live with it. Stonebear approached alone, the other warriors remaining behind with expressions ranging from confusion to disgust. His calloused hands reached for Jameson, and Eliza fought the urge to pull away as he examined the child with gentle motions that belied his fearsome appearance. "The boy grows strong," he observed, noting the infant's clear eyes and firm grip on his weathered finger. "He is fed. He is loved. That is more than many of ours can claim." His gaze flicked toward Chaska, who had moved to stand beside Eliza. Stonebear straightened, returning the child to Eliza's arms. With deliberate ceremony, he dragged his spear across the ground between them, carving a line in the red earth. "Beyond this line, you are no longer Lakota," he proclaimed, eyes fixed on Chaska. "The child is no longer of our blood." Chaska squared his shoulders, the posture of a man accepting sentence without surrender. "The blood matters less than the heart that pumps it," he replied, standing shoulder to shoulder with Eliza. "You understand nothing of what awaits you," Stonebear said, voice dropping low as the other warriors retreated toward their horses. "White settlements will not accept this joining. Bounty hunters track tribal runaways for gold. Men who would kill him," he nodded toward Chaska, "and take you and the child for other purposes." Eliza clutched Jameson tighter against her chest. "The Blue Coats patrol more often since the troubles at Fort Robinson," Stonebear continued. "They shoot Indians on sight, caring nothing for peaceful intentions." He reached into a pouch at his waist, withdrawing a small leather bundle tied with sinew. "You belong to neither world now. Both will hunt you." He placed the medicine pouch in Jameson's blanket. "Then we will make our own world," Eliza replied, covering herself and adjusting Jameson at her breast. Stonebear's weathered face cracked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Perhaps you already have." He turned away, rejoining his warriors without looking back. The dust of their departure hung in the air like a question with no proper answer in any tongue. Wyoming Territory had a way of binding unlikely souls together, just as surely as it tore others apart. 3 grueling days after their encounter with Stonebear, Eliza and Chaska crested a rocky ridge, Jameson bundled tight against the morning chill. Before them stretched a hidden valley nestled between twin mesas, their stone faces catching the dawn light like sentinels standing guard. Smoke from multiple cookfires rose in thin blue ribbons against the pale sky, betraying the presence of what looked to be a sizable settlement. "Confluence," Chaska whispered, the word carrying equal measures of hope and uncertainty. As they descended toward the valley floor, the settlement revealed itself a motley collection of structures that told the story of its inhabitants. Cabin walls of raw timber stood alongside hide-covered lodges. An old army tent had been repurposed into what appeared to be a trading post. Gardens thrived in careful rows, tended by figures whose varied dress and coloring spoke of origins as diverse as the continent itself. "Outcasts," Eliza murmured, recognizing the familiar posture of those who carried invisible brands upon their souls. Freedmen working alongside Mexican traders. Tribal members whose paint markings identified them as exiles from various nations. Women in frontier dress who stood with the unmistakable independence of widows who had claimed their husbands' dreams as their own. Their approach did not go unnoticed. From a crude watchtower constructed of salvaged wagon parts, a figure tracked their movement with the practiced eye of a scout. One-eyed and weathered, the man wore a mixture of crow garments and cavalry cast-offs, his face bearing the scars of one who had survived battles on both sides of civilization's shifting boundary. "What brings you to Camp of the Unwanted?" he called, rifle trained steadily upon the strangers. His gaze lingered on Jameson, noting the child's mixed heritage with particular interest. Eliza stepped forward, her black dress now sun-faded to the color of twilight. Weeks in the wilderness had stripped away her town mannerisms, leaving something rawer and more honest in their place. "We seek refuge," she answered, voice clear across the distance. "We have no people, no home." The sentry studied them for a long moment before raising a signal flag. Within minutes, a small delegation approached from the settlement. Gray Wolf, for that was the watchman's name, they would later learn, climbed down to meet the group halfway. 5 elders gathered in a rough semicircle, each representing a different thread in the tapestry of this improbable community. A former slave with hands that bore the memory of chains and the strength of freedom. A Mexican trader whose shrewd eyes missed nothing and judged less. A native medicine woman whose face was a map of wrinkles leading to eyes clear as mountain streams. A frontier widow whose spine remained ramrod straight despite the weight of surviving alone. "The council will hear you," Gray Wolf announced, his tone neither welcoming nor hostile, merely stating fact. What followed was unlike any frontier justice Eliza had witnessed. Each elder questioned them according to their own traditions. The trader broke bread with them, watching how they shared the portions. The freedmen asked for their stories, listening for truth between the words. The frontier widow examined their few belongings, noting repairs that spoke of resourcefulness born from necessity. When the medicine woman approached, she went straight to Jameson. Her gnarled fingers gentle against his cheek, she studied the child with eyes that seemed to look through him rather than at him. "This child drinks from 2 worlds," she declared, her voice carrying the authority of one who speaks seldom, but is always heeded. "He will bridge what others cannot." Silence followed her pronouncement, broken only by Jameson's contented gurgling. The council members exchanged glances, a wordless conversation built on years of shared survival. Confluence welcomes those who find strength in joining what others keep apart. The freedman finally spoke, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "You may stay." The months that followed saw both Eliza and Chaska find purpose within their new community. Word spread through mysterious frontier channels of the white flame mother who would nurse orphaned infants brought to the settlement. Children who might otherwise perish from hunger or exposure found life at Eliza's breast, regardless of their coloring or parentage. Chaska, meanwhile, taught hunting and tracking to the settlement's boys. Skills passed down through generations of Lakota warriors found new vessels in this mixed-blood young company. Knowledge that would have died with his banishment instead flourished in this valley of second chances. Together they built a small cabin on the settlement's edge, a structure unlike any other in Confluence. Half was constructed of sturdy timber in frontier style, with a proper stone hearth and wooden floor. The other half followed the traditional lodge design of Chaska's people, with smoke hole above and sleeping robes arranged in the ancient way. Like its builders, the dwelling bridged worlds never meant to touch. When autumn brought the first snow sifting down between the twin mesas, Eliza and Chaska faced a decision that had been growing between them since those desperate days at the depot. To continue as campmates bound by circumstance, or to acknowledge the deeper bond that had formed in the crucible of their shared flight. One evening, as Jameson slept peacefully in his cradle fashioned from a hollowed cottonwood trunk, Chaska presented Eliza with a ring. Carved from elk bone and braided with horsehair as black as midnight, it shone with the patient labor of many firelit evenings. "My people believe souls can find each other across many lives," he said, the words careful and measured. "Perhaps ours knew each other before." Under stars that had witnessed countless human dramas played out against the vastness of the frontier, they spoke vows neither's culture would recognize, but both hearts understood. No preacher presided, no paper recorded their union, just fire, witnesses from the settlement, and shared breath forming small clouds in the cold night air. The valley had worked its quiet magic, transforming strangers into family as surely as winter transforms the land. Their peace was shattered one dawn when thundering hooves approached the settlement. U.S. cavalry, blue uniforms stark against the golden prairie, rode in formation toward the main gathering place. Rifle barrels gleamed in the early light. "We're tracking Indian raiders who attacked a settlement 3 days' ride east," the commander announced, scanning the mixed population with undisguised suspicion. "All savages will present themselves for inspection." Eliza, standing at the edge of the gathering with Jameson held tight against her chest, felt Chaska's hand close around hers. The choice that faced them now would define not just their future, but that of Confluence itself. 5 winters come and gone since that day at Sweetwater Junction, and the boy Jameson sprouts tall as prairie wheat. Quick-footed and bright-eyed, that child moves between two worlds like he was born to bridge them. Morning might find him tracking jackrabbit with a bow crafted by Chaska's patient hands, while evening see him bent over dog-eared books. Eliza trades furs and herbs to acquire. Ain't natural, some might say, but out here in this land where rules bend like river grass in wind, natural takes on different meaning. Confluence ain't just a camp no more. Proper settlement now, with trading post that serves all comers, regardless of their roots. That cavalry incident folks still whisper about, the one where soldiers came hunting savages, well, that got settled peaceful-like. Gray Wolf's negotiation bought them something precious few ever find out here, the right to exist without hiding. I've seen enough frontier outposts wither and die to recognize when one's found its purpose. The morning sun breaks golden over the eastern ridge as Jameson crouches beside the stream, fishing line dangling in clear water. Eliza watches from the bank, her hands working rabbit hide into soft leather. The silver in her hair catches sunlight, no longer the mark of grief, but of seasons weathered and survived. "Ma?" The boy's voice carries clear over water sounds. "Did I come from your belly?" The question hangs between them like morning mist. Eliza's hands go still against the hide. She'd known this day would come, same as she'd known winter follows fall. "No, little man." Her voice stays steady as a well-built wagon. "You didn't grow inside me, but the moment I held you, you were mine." The boy considers this, face serious as a judge. "Where's my real mother, then?" "She gave you life," Eliza says, moving to sit beside him on the mossy bank. "I gave you love, and love. Love raised you. She gave you love." Jameson nods like he's weighing gold dust on a merchant's scale. Then he simply leans against her shoulder and returns to watching his line. Some truths need no more words than that. When summer ripens into naming day, folks gather from all corners of the settlement. Jameson stands proud in the circle, wearing deerskin vest over settler's cotton shirt. Not half one thing and half another, but something wholly new. The fire paints his face with light as old as these hills. Chaska steps forward, medicine pouch in hand, same one Stone Bear left 5 years back, when he marked the line between worlds. With reverence earned through blood and trust, he places it around the boy's neck. "From your father's people," he says, "protection against spirits that haunt lonely places." Then Eliza moves to stand beside them both. From a cord of braided leather, she slides her wedding band gold circle that once bound her to another life. This too goes around the boy's neck, resting against the medicine pouch. From your mother's people, she offers, reminder that circles don't end, just turn back on themselves in new ways. Evening finds them on the cabin porch, the boy asleep between them, as sunset turns the distant mesas to molten gold. Jameson's small hands clutch one finger from each parent even in sleep, as if anchoring them all together. Chaska's voice comes soft as deer moving through tall grass. The medicine woman was right. He bridges what others cannot. Eliza nods, her gaze on the horizon where two skies day and night meet in perfect harmony. Some stories are born from blood, she says. But the most powerful ones, the ones that save us, are born from love, sacrifice, and choices made in silence when no one else will act. Around them, the settlement breathes with life. They helped create proof that even in this harsh country, mercy finds root in the most unlikely soil.